Hello, everyone out there. Today we're going to be taking a look at classical conditioning, and let's just hop right into it. Okay, Pavlov's classical conditioning. To the left, we have the man himself, Ivan Pavlov. He was the originator, more so spearheader of the classical conditioning movement. We'll later be taking a look at his experiments that led to such movement. So, what is classical conditioning? Well, classical conditioning involves first the stimulus invoking a natural response by the subject, while the second doesn't. But after enough pairings together, the second stimulus becomes conditioned and causes a response to happen. Now, here's a breakdown of classical conditioning. So, first, going back to that first stimulus that I mentioned earlier, we refer to it as the unconditioned stimulus. And it always elicits a reflex action, or in other words, an uncontrolled response. An example of an unconditioned stimulus that we can look at is food, for instance. And when looking at the stimulus of food, we then see an uncontrolled response, i.e. salivation. So if you see food, you tend to salivate. So an unconditional response is a response to an unconditioned stimulus. It's naturally occurring. So once again, you see salivation at the smell of food or at the sight of food. So after that, we have the conditioned stimulus, which would be the second stimulus that we mentioned in the definition. So the conditioned stimulus is the stimulus that was originally neutral. It becomes conditioned after it has been paired with the unconditioned stimulus. Excuse me. So after you have the conditioned stimulus, you then receive a conditioned response. So a conditioned response is the original unconditioned response after it becomes conditioned, after it has been elicited by the neutral stimulus. So now we'll be taking a look at the original experiment that led to classical conditioning, which we will just refer to as Pavlov and his dogs. So just a bit of a backstory on this experiment. Originally, Pavlov, he kept dogs in his lab to study their digestive tracts, right? Also, just like humans, dogs naturally salivate to the sight of food. And throughout his experiments, Pavlov, he began to notice that over time, the dogs weren't always responding to the food in terms of their salivation. Eventually, he noticed that the dogs they began salivating at the sound of his footsteps at the sight of the food bowl. So Pavlov, he then decided, once realizing that the dogs were salivating to other things than just the food, he decided to get a bell. And in this experiment, the bell will act as the neutral stimulus. So he hoped to ring the bell to evoke a conditioned response in the dogs that responds being salivation. Now, of course, over time, if you have a neutral stimulus, there will be no response. But also, the food was the unconditioned response, as mentioned earlier, where the dog would salivate. So, but over time, after pairing the bell and the meat over time, you would then begin to see a change to where the bell would then become a conditioned stimulus and the dog would then conditionally respond to the bell, thus salivating. Now,